The door swung open, and Ethan Cole stopped dead in his boots. Smoke, rising from the chimney he hadn't lit in 6 months. Light, glowing from the window he kept dark on purpose. And a smell. Warm bread, thick stew, something sizzling in the pan, that punched him straight in the chest like a fist wrapped in a memory he'd spent 3 years trying to bury. His hand moved to the rifle on his back before his mind caught up with his instincts. Because nobody cooked in this house. Nobody was supposed to. Not anymore. If this story already has your heart beating faster, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from, because I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go. Ethan Cole was not a man who scared easily. He had ridden through Apache territory alone with nothing but a canteen and a prayer. He had pulled a calf out of a flash flood with his bare hands at 2 in the morning. He had stood at the edge of his wife's grave in the pouring rain and not shed a single tear. Not because he didn't feel it, but because there was nobody left to cry with. 3 years of that. 3 years of riding out at dawn and coming home to darkness. So when he stepped through his own front door that October evening and saw a young woman standing at her eyes were dark brown, almost black in the lamplight, and there was something behind them that Ethan couldn't name right away. Not fear. Something older than fear. "My name is Lydia Hart," she said, "and before you reach for that rifle, you should know that your dinner's almost ready." Ethan stared at her. He stopped, started again. "Lady, you are standing in my house." "I know." "Cooking at my stove." "Yes." "In my—" He looked around. She had cleaned the place. The dishes that had been stacked in the dry sink for 2 weeks were washed and stacked proper. The floor had been swept. Someone had folded the blanket on the chair by the fireplace, the one he just left crumpled there because it didn't matter. "You cleaned my house." "It needed it," she said simply, and turned back to the stove. Ethan stood there for a full 5 seconds, with his mouth open and his rifle half raised, and absolutely no idea what to do next. He had expected a lot of things riding home that evening. A cold room, a quiet night, maybe a whiskey in the same 4 walls he'd been staring at since Clara died. He had not expected this. "How did you get in?" he finally said. "Your back window doesn't latch right. I noticed it from the outside." She glanced back at him over her shoulder. "You should fix that. Anybody could walk in." "Anybody did walk in," Ethan said flatly. Something almost like a smile crossed her face. Almost. She pulled the pot off the heat, set it on the iron trivet on the table, and then laid out a bowl and a spoon like she was setting a proper table. Like this was a thing that happened here. Like there wasn't a man standing behind her, with his blood running hot and his jaw locked tight. "Sit down," she said. "Eat first, then I'll explain everything." "You'll explain everything right now," Ethan said, "before I decide whether I'm going to the sheriff." She stopped. Turned to face him fully this time, both hands at her sides, and he saw it then, what he hadn't seen before. Her dress was torn at the hem, dried mud caked along the edge. One of her boots had a split in the sole that had been stitched back together with what looked like coarse twine, and her left wrist, where the sleeve had slipped back slightly, showed the faded yellow edge of a bruise that was maybe 4 or 5 days old. Ethan lowered the rifle. He didn't put it down, but he lowered it. "Explain," he said, quieter now. Lydia Hart pulled out the chair at the table and sat down across from where the bowl was set. She folded her hands. She looked at him directly, without apology, but without pride either. Just the flat, clear truth of someone who had already lost too much to waste time on pretense. "I was traveling through," she said, "with a wagon train out of Tucson. 3 days back, we hit a wash that flooded overnight. Lost 2 wagons. Lost one man. She paused. I had nobody on that train. No family. No husband. I was traveling to my cousin's place in New Mexico, but I don't know exactly where, only a town name. And I don't have money left for supplies or a horse. My mule broke a leg in the flood and had to be put down. She said that last part without a flicker, which told Ethan that particular grief had already been dealt with privately, alone, the way she seemed to deal with most things. I walked 2 days to reach Dry Creek. When I got to town, the hotel said they'd take in travelers at 15 cents a night. I don't have 15 cents. Ethan said nothing. The man at the feed store told me there was a rancher about 4 miles east who lived alone, she continued. Said the place had been half falling apart for years, and the man who owned it didn't seem to much care about it anymore. So I thought... She paused again, and for the first time looked down at her hands. I thought maybe I could offer something useful in exchange for a few nights' shelter. A meal. Some cleaned-up rooms. Something worth trading. You thought you'd just let yourself into a stranger's house? Ethan said. I thought I'd find out if anybody was home first, she said. There wasn't, so I started a fire and started cooking. I figured either you'd come home and accept the offer, or you'd come home and throw me out. Either way, you'd have a hot dinner waiting. Ethan looked at her for a long time. He looked at the bruise on her wrist. He looked at the stitched boot. He looked at the way her shoulders were set. Not defeated, not desperate, just settled. The way a person gets when they've already rehearsed every version of how this moment might go and made peace with all of them. He sat down across from her. 3 days, he said. That's all. She nodded. And you sleep in the barn. She nodded again. I'm not a charitable man, he said. I want you to be clear on that. I'm not asking for charity, she said. I'm asking for 3 days of work in exchange for 3 nights of shelter. That's a transaction. Ethan picked up the spoon. He ate a mouthful of the stew. He didn't say anything for a moment. The stew was good. Better than good. Thick and seasoned with something he couldn't identify. The kind of warmth that started in your stomach and moved outward, like the first fire of autumn. He hadn't tasted anything that good in 3 years. He didn't say that. Fine, he said. 3 days. She was up before him the next morning. That was the first thing that surprised him, that he heard sounds from the kitchen before daylight. The scrape of the fire poker, the clink of the pot. And he lay in his bed for a moment in the dark, and his body did something it hadn't done in a long time. It relaxed. Not much, but some. By the time he pulled his boots on and walked to the kitchen, she had coffee on and was standing at the window looking out at the yard, with her arms crossed and her face still, reading something in the light that he couldn't see. Morning, she said, without turning. He poured himself a cup. You always up this early? On a working ranch? You have to be. She turned from the window. Your east fence line, the one running past the Dry Creek bed. About 60 yards of it is down. Ethan looked at her over the rim of his cup. You walked the fence line? Before dawn. She said it like it was obvious. Couldn't sleep anyway. Your chickens haven't been laying because the coop's got a gap in the back wall where something's been getting in at night. Probably a weasel. Your water trough by the barn has a crack running about 4 inches along the base. It's not broken through yet, but it will be by winter if it freezes. Ethan set down his cup very slowly. How long have you been up? He said. About 2 hours. She pulled a chair out and sat. I made a list. She actually had a list, written on the back of a torn piece of brown paper in neat, precise handwriting. Fence repairs, coop repairs, the trough, the missing shingles on the south side of the barn roof, a broken latch on the corral gate. the garden plot behind the house that had gone completely to weeds. Ethan stared at it. "You made a list of everything wrong with my ranch?" he said. "I made a list of what needs doing," she said. "There's a difference." He looked up at her. "Mr. Cole," she said, and her voice was even and clear and not unkind. "I don't know what happened here. I don't know why this place is the way it is. It's not my business, and I'm not asking. But I've been working on ranches since I was 9 years old, and I can see what this land is supposed to be. It's good land. It's just been let go." She paused. 3 days isn't enough to fix all of it, but it's enough to start. Ethan sat down across from her. He thought about what he was going to say. He thought about telling her that it wasn't her business what had happened here, which she'd already said herself. He thought about telling her that 3 days was 3 days, and that was the end of it. He thought about telling her that he didn't want anything started that wasn't going to be finished. What he said was, "I'll show you where the fencing tools are kept." She worked like she'd been born to it. That was the thing Ethan couldn't quite reconcile. The way she moved through the physical labor of the ranch, with a quiet efficiency that reminded him, against his will, of someone who knew exactly what each task demanded before she started it. She didn't ask for help, and she didn't complain, and she didn't do the thing he half expected, which was to make a show of working hard so that he would notice. She just worked. Like it was for her own reasons. Like the ranch itself was the thing she was answering to, not him. He caught himself watching her from across the yard that first afternoon, hammer in her hand, driving nails into the fence posts with clean, sure strokes. Not the tentative swings of someone learning, but the practiced rhythm of someone who'd done it 1,000 times before. He walked over. "Where'd you learn to do that?" he asked. She didn't look up from the nail. "My father's ranch, outside of Flagstaff." Strike. "We had about 200 acres, ran cattle, sheep for a while." "Had?" he said. She drove the last nail home, stood up, pushed the hair back from her face, looked at the fence line ahead. "Had," she confirmed, and moved to the next post. Ethan stood there a moment. "You want to talk about it?" "No," she said simply, and kept walking. He followed her. He didn't know exactly why. It wasn't that he felt sorry for her, or it wasn't only that. It was something else, something more complicated. The uncomfortable recognition of a particular kind of silence he knew from the inside. "My wife died," he said, 3 years back." Lydia stopped walking. She didn't turn around. "I'm sorry," she said. "Fever. It came fast. Went faster. I was out on a cattle drive, 4 days away. By the time I got the message and rode back, it was..." He stopped. The words still didn't come any easier for the practice. "There wasn't much left to come home for. I kept the ranch going because what else was there to do? But I stopped caring much about it." She turned around then. She looked at him for a long moment. "That makes sense," she said quietly. He'd expected something different. Sympathy, maybe. Or the uncomfortable reassurances people gave, the "she's in a better place" and "time heals" kind of words that always landed like rocks. But she just said it made sense. And somehow, that night she cooked again. She hadn't asked. She hadn't announced it. He came in from the barn after dark, and the smell hit him again. This time, it was fried eggs and salt pork and fresh biscuits. Simple fare, but hot and ready. And she was already eating her portion at the table when he sat down. "You don't have to do this," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm not asking you to cook every night." "I know that too." She looked up. "I like to cook. It gives me something to do in the evenings." A pause. And you look like a man who hasn't had a proper meal in longer than 3 days." He didn't answer that. He ate. The silence between them was strange. Not uncomfortable, exactly, but charged, like the air before a thunderstorm. Like they were both aware of something building that neither of them had named yet. "Tell me about the land," she said after a while. "Before. What it was like when you first came here." He looked at her. "Why?" "Because the way a man talks about his land before it went wrong tells you what it could be again," she said. Something shifted in Ethan's chest. Something uncomfortable and warm in equal measure. He looked down at his plate. "There was a creek that ran year-round along the north border," he said slowly. "Not anymore, mostly. But it used to. Clara planted apple trees along it. 4 of them. I don't know if they're still alive. I haven't walked up that way in—" He stopped, looked out the window at the dark. "A while." Lydia said nothing. "The south pasture held good grass," he said, "before the dry years. It could again, probably, with the right management." He paused. "I had 12 head of cattle when I first built this place. Down to 4 now. Lost some to drought. Sold some when I needed cash. Couldn't bring myself to care enough to build the herd back up." "But you care now," she said quietly. "A little." He looked at her sharply. "What makes you say that?" "Because you're talking about it in the present tense," she said. "Like it's still real." Ethan stared at her. He wanted to say something dismissive, something that would put the walls back where they belonged. Instead, what he felt was seen, like standing in an open field with nowhere to retreat to. He cleared his throat, stood up, pushed back his chair. "I'll fix the latch on the corral gate before bed," he said. And he walked out. On the morning of the second day, everything changed. He was in the barn when he heard hoofbeats coming up the drive, hard and fast, not the casual pace of a neighbor dropping in. He stepped out to see a rider coming in at a gallop, pulling up short in the yard in a spray of dust. It was Tom Briggs, who ran the small spread about 2 miles south. Tom's face was wrong, white around the edges. "Ethan," he said, his voice tight, "you hear what happened in town last night?" "I haven't been to town," Ethan said. "Jed Holloway's place." Tom leaned down from the saddle. "Somebody served him papers yesterday afternoon. County marshal came and everything. Says he owes back debt on his land title. Some banking claim from 5 years back he never knew about. They gave him 30 days to settle the debt or vacate." Ethan felt something cold move through him. "That's not right. Jed's had that land since 1879, Tom said. "I know. Everybody knows. But the papers are legal, or they look legal. Jed showed them to a lawyer in town, and the man couldn't find a clear reason to dispute them." Tom glanced toward the house. He noticed Lydia standing in the doorway, and his eyes went back to Ethan, questioning. "She's working here for a few days," Ethan said shortly. "What else?" "Word is there's a man in town. Came in 2 days ago, staying at the hotel. Name of Victor Hale." Tom said the name like it tasted bad. "He's got men with him, 3 or 4 at least, and he's been buying drinks at the saloon and asking questions about who owns what land in the county, what the water rights look like, where the railroad's planning to come through." A pause. "He's a speculator, Ethan, the land grab kind, and Jed's place is just the first." Ethan said nothing for a moment. What's Jed going to do? What can he do? He's got a wife and 2 kids. He doesn't have the money to fight it in court. Tom shook his head. "I'm riding to warn whoever I can today. I figured you should know, since your land's worth something, sitting right where it does between the 2 water sources." Ethan looked across the yard. looked at the fence line they'd repaired yesterday, looked at the garden plot Lydia had already started clearing, turning the dead soil over with a purpose that made the whole idea of planting something there feel suddenly possible. "I hear you," he said. "Thank you, Tom." Tom turned his horse and rode back down the drive. Ethan stood in the yard. He heard footsteps behind him. He didn't turn around. "You heard that," he said. "Yes," said Lydia. "Victor Hale." He said the name. He felt her go very still behind him. He turned. Her face had changed. Whatever careful neutrality she kept there, whatever measured distance she'd been holding, was gone. In its place was something hard and raw and old, like a scar suddenly exposed. "You know that name," Ethan said. It wasn't a question. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes were fixed somewhere past him, past the yard, past the fence line. "Yes," she said. Her voice was flat, controlled. The kind of control that comes from having already been through the fire and learning to live right next to the heat. "I know that name." The silence stretched. "Tell me," Ethan said. She looked at him, and for the first time since she'd appeared in his house, Lydia Hart looked not broken, never broken, but cracked through in the way that things that have survived too much get cracked, where you can see right through to the hard, dark center of it. "My father's ranch," she said. "The one outside Flagstaff. The one I told you about." A long breath. Victor Hale took it. She told him at the table. She told him all of it. Not in pieces, not carefully, but in the flat, relentless way of someone reading a record, someone who had organized the facts of a terrible thing into a shape they could carry. Her family had owned their land for 11 years. Her father, Daniel Hart, had built the place up from nothing. Dry land, dead soil, the same kind of stubborn nothing that becomes something when the right person refuses to give up on it. They'd had cattle, a good-sized garden, an orchard just starting to produce. Her mother had died when Lydia was 16. Her brother had gone east for work and never come back. It was just Lydia and her father, and it was enough. It was home. Victor Hale came to the territory 2 years ago. He had money. Railroad money, land company money. And he had lawyers, and he had documents, and he had men who stood just at the edge of what was legal, with their hands near their guns. He bought up land from people who were willing to sell, and when they weren't willing, he found other ways. For Daniel Hart, the way was a forged debt claim tied to a water rights agreement her father had signed 15 years earlier. One where a single word, changed in a document that looked exactly like the original, transformed what had been a usage agreement into a collateral claim. The forgery was good enough that the county judge, who had also recently received a very generous donation to his re-election fund, ruled in Hale's favor without much deliberation. "We had 2 weeks," Lydia said. "We appealed to the territorial court. They dismissed it. We went to the federal land office. They said it would take 6 months to investigate, and we should vacate in the meantime." She stopped, looked at her hands. "My father refused to leave. They sent men to make him." A beat. "He's not a violent man. He didn't fight them. But when you've built something with your hands for 11 years, and someone takes it out from under you with a piece of paper, something breaks." She looked up. "He had a stroke," she said, 3 months ago. "He's alive. He's in Flagstaff with a family that took him in out of kindness. He can't work anymore. Can't speak clearly." She exhaled through her nose. "That's why I was on that wagon train. I was trying to get to my cousin in New Mexico. I don't have anything left to stay in Arizona for." Ethan sat across from her in silence. The lamp burned low between them. "And now Victor Hale is here," he said. And now he's here, she said, doing the same thing. He thought about Jed Holloway, about the papers that looked legal, about the lawyer who couldn't find a reason to dispute them. He thought about Tom Briggs's face, white around the edges. He thought about his land, about the North Creek and the South Pasture, and the apple trees he hadn't walked to in 3 years.
"He'll come for my land," Ethan said.
"Your land sits between 2 water sources," she said quietly. "In this part of the territory, in a drought year, that's worth more than the railroad. Yes, he'll come for it." Ethan stood up from the table. He walked to the window, stood there with his back to her for a long moment, looking out at the dark. "What happened to the people who—"
"You said you wanted 3 days."
She looked at him steadily. "Yes." "That was yesterday's offer," he said. "I'm changing the terms." He held her gaze. "You stay, as long as you need to. In exchange, you tell me everything you know about Victor Hale, how he works, how he documents, what he uses, what he's afraid of." Lydia Hart looked at him for a long moment, and Ethan Cole watched something shift in her face. Not relief, not exactly. More like the particular stillness of someone who has been bracing for impact for so long that they've forgotten what it feels like to stand on solid ground. "All right," she said quietly. "All right," he said. He turned back to the window. Somewhere out there in the dark, on the road between Dry Creek and whatever town Victor Hale had just come from, the next chapter of something was already moving toward them. Ethan Cole didn't know yet what he was going to do about it.
But for the first time in 3 years, he felt something he hadn't expected to feel again. He felt like fighting. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He sat in the chair by the cold fireplace long after the lamp burned out, turning the same thought over and over in his mind, the way a man works a splinter with his thumb. Not to fix it yet, just to know exactly where it is, exactly how deep it's gone. Victor Hale was in Dry Creek, and Lydia Hart had been running from him for 3 months. He wasn't sure which of those 2 facts sat heavier. By the time the first gray light came through the window, he had made up his mind about exactly one thing. He needed to go to town. He needed to see this man with his own eyes. Because Ethan Cole had lived long enough to know that what people feared was almost never as simple as the shape they'd been given to fear it in. And he needed to know what he was actually dealing with before he decided what to do next. He found Lydia already in the kitchen when he came out.
Same as yesterday, coffee on, standing at the window. "I'm riding to town," he said. She turned. Her eyes were clear, which told him she hadn't slept much either. "I know. You're staying here." She opened her mouth. "Not because I'm protecting you," he said quickly, cutting off whatever argument was forming. "Because if Victor Hale has men in this town, and one of them recognizes your face, you lose any advantage you've got before we even know what that advantage is." He held her gaze. "You told me last night how he works. He collects information before he moves. So do I." She closed her mouth, thought about it, nodded once. "What are you looking for?" she asked. "I want to see the papers he served Jed Holloway," Ethan said. "And I want to look this man in the eye." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He'll be polite. That's the first thing you need to know. He's not what you expect."
"He's well-dressed, well-spoken, and he'll shake your hand and look you directly in the face, and you'll walk away thinking, he seems like a reasonable man." A pause. "That's what he does. He makes you feel like whatever's coming is reasonable." Ethan took his cup of coffee and drank it standing up. "I've dealt with reasonable men before." "Not like this one," she said quietly. He looked at her. "When he came to our place," she said, "he sat at our table. My father offered him coffee, and he accepted it. And he sat there, and he said to my father, he said, 'Mr. Hart, I want you to know I genuinely respect what you've built here. That's why I'm giving you this opportunity to resolve the matter before it becomes unpleasant." And my father shook his hand. Her jaw tightened. "A man who makes you shake his hand while he's stealing from you is the most dangerous kind of man there is." The kitchen was very quiet. "Watch his hands," she said. "He touches things, picks them up, turns them over, sets them down. He does it while he's talking, so you're watching his hands instead of his face. It's deliberate." Ethan set down his cup. "You've thought about him a lot." "Every day for 3 months," she said simply. "When you lose everything to a person, you learn them whether you want to or not." He picked up his hat from the hook by the door, paused. "You said he forged the document, the water rights agreement." He turned. "Do you still have the original, or anything proving the forgery?" Something moved across her face. Not quite hope, not quite pain. Somewhere between the two. "My father kept it," she said. "Locked box under the floorboard of the bedroom. When they put us out, I went back." A beat. The box was gone. Ethan absorbed that. He had men take it. "Before we even appealed," she said. "He was thorough." Ethan put his hat on and walked out into the morning. Dry Creek on a Thursday morning was never a loud place. But Ethan felt the difference the moment he rode in. It was in the way people stood talking in 2s and 3s outside the feed store and the post office, leaning in close, voices low. It was in the way Mabel Greer, who ran the dry goods, watched him from behind her window without her usual wave. Something had shifted in the town's posture overnight, the way a herd of cattle shifts before a storm. Not running yet, but already looking for the direction to run. He went to Jed Holloway first. Jed was at his usual table in the back of the hardware store, where he helped out 2 days a week. But he wasn't working. He was sitting with his hands flat on the table, staring at a document in front of him, with the expression of a man trying to read something in a language he almost speaks. He looked up when Ethan came in. Something in his face shifted. Relief, maybe, at not being alone with it for a minute. "Ethan." "Jed." Ethan pulled up a chair and sat across from him. "Can I see it?" Jed pushed the document across the table. Ethan read it slowly. He wasn't a lawyer, and he knew it. But he was a man who had read enough land contracts and deed records to know the basic shape of a legitimate claim. He read it twice. He found the section that established the debt, tied to a promissory note from 1881, supposedly signed by Jed's father when he first established the deed. "Your father sign any notes in 1881? Ethan asked. Jed's face tightened. "My father died in 1879. Ethan looked up from the document. There it was. "The signature," Ethan said. "He said it's a matter for the court to decide, and I need to bring a lawyer." "I don't have money for a lawyer, Ethan." Ethan sat back. "Who else has had papers served?" "Minnie Calhoun got a notice this morning," Jed said. "Some kind of environmental claim on her water access. And I heard Pete Reyes is getting visited this afternoon." He paused. "It's not random. He's going after the places with the best water access first. Anything near a natural source." Ethan thought about what Lydia had said. Your land sits between 2 water sources. Has anyone talked to this man directly? He called it an opportunity. The word landed exactly the way Ethan expected it to. He stood up. "Don't sign anything," he said. "Not one thing. Not even an acknowledgement of receipt. You understand me?" Jed looked up at him. "You know something about this man?" "Enough," Ethan said. "I'll be in touch." He found Victor Hale at the hotel, which was also the best saloon in town, which wasn't saying much, but Hale had clearly decided to make it work. He was at a corner table with 2 men who sat at angles to each other, in the way that men sit when their primary job is to watch the room. Hale himself was turned toward the window, reviewing papers, a cup of coffee at his elbow, and he looked, exactly as Lydia had described, like a reasonable man. Well-dressed, composed, the kind of careful, groomed quality that money and patience build together. He looked up when Ethan walked in, and he smiled. "Good morning," he said pleasantly. "You look like a man with something on his mind." "I'm Ethan Cole," Ethan said. "I have land 4 miles east." "Ah." Hale set down his paper. "I've been meaning to write out your way, Mr. Cole. Your property came up in my research. Interesting parcel. Good elevation. 2 natural water sources in close proximity." "My land's not for sale," Ethan said. "Most things aren't," Hale said smoothly. Ethan held the man's gaze for a long moment, and he did what Lydia had told him to do. He watched his face, not his hands, and what he saw in Victor Hale's face was the most dangerous thing a man could carry. Patience, the kind that had never yet been beaten. "I'll be watching," Ethan said. "Whatever you're doing in this county, I'll be watching it." Hale tilted his head slightly. "I would expect nothing less from a conscientious landowner." A pause. He set the cup down very gently. "I do hope, Mr. Cole, that you're not allowing yourself to be influenced by outside parties, people who might have their own interests in how this territory develops." Another pause, softer this time, with the particular softness of a threat that doesn't want to be called a threat. A man alone on his land, with no family and no allies. He should be careful about who he takes counsel from. Ethan went very still. "Careful's a good word," he said. "I've always been partial to it." He turned and walked out. He rode hard on the way home, not because he was afraid, or not only that, but because his mind was moving faster than his horse, and he needed the physical motion to keep up with it. Victor Hale had made 2 things clear in that conversation. 1, he was already planning to come after Ethan's land, and 2, he knew Ethan hadn't been alone. He pulled into the yard, and Lydia was at the fence line on the west side, doing something with wire and a tool he didn't recognize, and he rode straight to her. She looked up at his face, and her hands went still. "He knows you're here," Ethan said. She didn't look surprised. She looked like someone who had been half expecting it, and was only now feeling the full weight of being right. "What did he say?" "He didn't say your name. He didn't have to." Ethan dismounted. "He warned me about outside parties and their interests. And he looked at me the whole time like a man who already knows something I don't." Lydia set down the wire tool, straightened. "He has people in every town. That's how he works. He gets there, he buys information, and before anyone's even realized what's happening, he already knows the shape of the place." "Who in Dry Creek would have told him about you?" Ethan said. She thought for a moment. "The feed store man." He picked up the fence tool she'd set down, turned it over, handed it back. "Show me what you were doing with this," he said. Something changed in her face. Small, but there. She showed him. They worked side by side through the afternoon without speaking much, and the silence was different from the silences of the first day, less like 2 strangers being careful, and more like 2 people who were past the needing to be careful stage and hadn't quite decided what came next. It was Lydia who broke it, toward late afternoon, while they were reinforcing the gatepost on the corral. "The document he used on my father," she said. "There was something wrong with it, not just the signature." Ethan looked at her. "The notary seal," she said. "Every legal document in the territory gets a specific county seal, depending on which court processes it. The seal on ours was for Maricopa County. But the water rights agreement it supposedly referenced was filed in Yavapai County in 1871. A document modifying a Yavapai filing
would have to be notarized in Yavapai, not Maricopa. She paused. I didn't realize it until months later, when it was too late. Ethan was quiet for a moment.
If Jed's paper has the same kind of error, it might not be the same type, she said. He's careful. He learns from what's worked before and changes what didn't. But there will be something wrong with it. There always is with forged documents. You just have to know what you're looking for. A pause. The problem is, knowing what to look for and having someone who can testify to it in court are two very different things. Are there people in the territory who can? Ethan said. Land record specialists. Someone who'd know a forged notary seal or a wrong county stamp? Yes, she said. There's a man in Prescott, former federal land office examiner. His name is Aldridge. She hesitated. But getting to Prescott, getting him to come here, building a case before Hale has time to move the legal process forward, that's a matter of weeks at most, probably less. Then we move in days, Ethan said. She looked at him. You're serious? You told me yesterday my land's worth fighting for, he said. You told me Jed Holloway's worth fighting for. You think I rode into town and looked that man in the face just to come home and do nothing? A beat. You barely know Jed Holloway, she said carefully. No, Ethan said, but I know what it is to have land and lose the thing that made it matter. And I am not going to watch that man do to Jed and Minnie Calhoun and Pete Reyes what... He stopped, started again, quieter. What somebody should have stopped from happening to your father. The evening air sat between them very still. Lydia turned back to the gatepost. She drove the last nail clean and true. Aldridge, she said again, in Prescott. If anyone could establish the forgery in front of a territorial court, it's him. Could he be reached by wire? Maybe, if the telegraph office in town would send the message. Write it tonight, Ethan said. Everything you know about the Flagstaff documents, the seal discrepancy, the signature timeline, everything. I'll write it to the telegraph office at first light. She was quiet for a long moment. Ethan, she said, and his name in her mouth was careful, like she was handling something that might break if she wasn't paying attention. Why are you doing this? You don't know me. 3 days ago, I was a stranger in your house. He didn't answer right away. He picked up the tools and started walking toward the barn, and she fell into step beside him, and they walked that way for a few paces before he said, quiet, not looking at her, You told me last night that my land is still real because I talk about it in the present tense. Yes. You're still talking about your father's ranch in the present tense, he said. You said it's good land, good orchard. Not was. Is. He pushed open the barn door. You're not done fighting for it either. You're just out of road to run on. Lydia stood in the barn doorway, and Ethan Cole, who had spent 3 years not caring about much of anything, moved through the lamplight, doing the quiet evening work of a man who'd remembered what it felt like to have a reason. She watched him for a moment. Then she went inside to write the telegram. He checked on her an hour later. She was at the kitchen table, 3 pages of careful handwriting in front of her. Everything she remembered about the Flagstaff documents laid out with a precision and clarity that surprised him and somehow didn't. She looked up when he came in. There was something different in her face, something exhausted and determined in equal measure. The face of someone who has been carrying a thing alone for so long they'd forgotten it was possible to put it down. Is it enough? He asked. She looked at the pages. It's what I have. Then it's enough, he said. She almost smiled. Not quite. He went to bed. He lay in the dark and listened to the wind move across the roof of the cabin that he'd let fall into disrepair for 3 years.
and he thought about Victor Hale's patient eyes, and Jed Holloway's dead father's forged signature, and Lydia Hart writing 3 pages of evidence by lamplight at his kitchen table. And then, somewhere between one thought and the next, the thing he'd been waiting without knowing it finally arrived. A clear, cold, uncomplicated conviction. The kind a man can build a course of action on. Victor Hale had been doing this long enough to believe that people stayed beaten. He was about to find out what happened when they didn't. The telegram went out at first light. Ethan rode to town before the feed store opened, before the saloon unlocked its doors, before Victor Hale's men had finished their breakfast. The telegraph operator, a thin young man named Curtis, who wore the same green suspenders every single day of his life, read Lydia's message twice with his eyebrows climbing his forehead. "This is a lot of legal language for a rancher," Curtis said carefully. "Send it," Ethan said. "All of it, word for word." "It's addressed to a federal land examiner in Prescott." "Send it," Ethan said again, and put the money on the counter. Curtis sent it. Ethan rode home faster than he'd ridden out, because the exposed feeling of being in town with Hale's men watching the street from the saloon porch had sat badly in his stomach. One of them, a broad man with a gray coat and a hat pulled low, had watched him walk into the telegraph office, and watched him walk back out with a kind of deliberate attention that wasn't quite threatening, but was meant to feel close to it. Ethan had looked straight back at him. The man had looked away first. Small victory. He'd take it. When he got home, Lydia had the garden plot half cleared. She'd been at it since before he left, turning the dead soil with a long-handled fork, pulling up the knotted roots of 3 years of neglect with her bare hands wrapped in an old piece of sacking. She looked up when he rode in. "Did it go?" she asked. "Every word," he said. "Now we wait." She nodded and went back to the soil. He stood there watching her work for a moment. The focused, relentless quality of it. The way she attacked each root like it had personally wronged her. And he understood then that this was how she dealt with fear. Not by sitting with it, by moving. He went to get a second fork. They worked the garden together through the morning without speaking much, and the silence was the good kind. The kind built on shared motion rather than shared avoidance. By midday, they'd cleared enough ground that you could actually see what it had once been and what it could be again. This was her garden, Lydia said, not a question. Ethan drove the fork into the earth. She had tomatoes along the south side, beans, squash. He paused. "I don't know why I let it go. I think I couldn't stand to look at it." "That's not hard to understand," Lydia said. "No," he said. "But I let it go too long. 3 years of too long." He looked at the cleared ground. "It's going to take more than seeds to get something growing this late in the season." "Not tomatoes," she said. "Too late. But winter squash, planted right now, in good soil, with the right water. You could have something by early November." She crouched down, picked up a handful of earth, rubbed it between her fingers. "The soil's not as dead as it looks. There's something still in it." She looked up at him with a half smile. "Good land always holds out longer than you'd expect." He looked at her for a moment. She was talking about the garden. He was fairly certain she wasn't only talking about the garden. The reply from Prescott came the next morning. Curtis rode out himself to deliver it, which told Ethan that whatever the message said, it was significant enough that the telegraph operator didn't want to sit on it. He handed the folded paper to Ethan at the door, with the expression of a man delivering something he doesn't quite understand, but suspects is important. "He'll come?" "He says he needs the original documents, the papers Hale served on your family, or copies of the original filing with the clear county stamp." She looked up at him. "He says he'll come to Dry Creek. if we can establish that the forgery pattern is consistent with what he saw in Maricopa County 2 years ago. Someone else tried to fight Hale then. It didn't work. But Aldridge kept his notes. Lydia was quiet for a long moment. "The documents he served on my father," she said slowly. "I told you the locked box was gone, but—" She stopped, set down the telegram. There was a filing copy. When we first appealed to the territorial court, we had to submit the document as evidence. The court would have made a record copy. It wouldn't be the original, but a certified court record of the document that was used against my family. Ethan saw where she was going. A certified copy from the territorial court is still a legal document.
And if it carries the same false notary seal? She stopped, drew a slow breath. That's enough. That's enough for Aldridge to work with. How do we get it? The Territorial Court Records Office is in Prescott, she said. I'd need to go in person. Request it as a party to the original case. She paused. Which means leaving here. Which means... I'll go with you, Ethan said. She looked at him with that measuring look she had, the one that wasn't quite suspicion and wasn't quite surprise. That's 2 days' ride each way. I know how far Prescott is, he said. Who watches the ranch? Tom Briggs owes me from 3 years back when I pulled his wagon out of the creek, Ethan said. He'll sit the place for 4 days. She was quiet. Lydia. He said her name directly, which he hadn't done much, and she went very still at the sound of it. Victor Hale is already moving. Jed Holloway has 30 days on paper, but Hale won't wait 30 days before he puts pressure on the others. Every day we sit here waiting for something to happen is a day he's using. He held her gaze. We have to move first. She picked up the telegram again, read it once more, set it down. When do we leave? She said. Tomorrow at dawn, he said. They left before came back with a pair of boots that were too small for him and had been Clara's, sitting in the back of a trunk for 3 years because he hadn't been able to give them away and hadn't been able to look at them either. He set them on the table. Try those, he said, and walked back outside before she could say anything. When they loaded up the next morning, she was wearing them. Neither of them mentioned it. They were 2 hours out of Dry Creek when Ethan saw the rider. He'd been watching the road behind them since they left. Not obviously, not in a way that would look like fear, but with the steady peripheral awareness of a man who knows when something doesn't add up. And this rider, half a mile back, had maintained exactly the same distance for 2 hours without closing it or falling behind. Don't turn around, he said quietly. Lydia's hands shifted on the reins. How long? Since the junction outside town, he said. Gray coat, big horse. He sat on the saloon porch yesterday morning, watching me come out of the telegraph office. One of Hale's men, she said, flat. Certain. One of them. He kept his voice even. Which means Hale knows we're going somewhere. He doesn't know where. He sent someone to find out. What do we do? Ethan thought for a moment. He knew the road to Prescott. He'd ridden it a dozen times. About 6 miles ahead, it forked. The main route went straight through, wide and open. But there was a lesser trail that cut south through the canyon passage, before rejoining the road 9 miles further on. Longer, rougher. But the canyon walls would swallow a rider completely in less than a quarter mile. There's a fork ahead, he said. When I say move, we move fast. How fast? Fast enough that he can't see which way we went before he reaches the fork. She glanced at him. I can ride? I know you can. I mean, I can really ride, she said. Don't slow down for me. Something like a smile pulled at the corner of his mouth. Then keep up,
He kept their pace steady, unhurried, watched the fork approach in the middle distance. 1 mile out. Half a mile. He measured the follower's position in the back of his mind. Still the same distance, still patient, still waiting to see. 200 yards from the fork, Ethan said. Now. They moved. He didn't look back. He heard hooves and knew she was right beside him. Heard the ground change under them as they hit the canyon trail, and the walls rose up and swallowed the sky. And then there was just the sound of the horses and the rush of moving fast through narrow space. He didn't slow down for a full mile. When he finally pulled up, they were deep enough into the canyon passage that the main road was completely invisible. Lydia pulled up beside him, breathing hard, her hair half pulled from its pin, and she turned in the saddle to look behind them. Nothing. She let out one short, sharp breath. "He won't know which way we went." "Not for a while," Ethan said. "Long enough." She turned forward again, pushed the loose hair back from her face with one hand. "You knew that trail." "Rode it with Clara before the road was built," he said. "Used to be the main route through." He paused. "We'll add 2 hours to the trip." "Worth it," she said. "Yes," he said. They rode. They stopped at nightfall at a small homestead where Ethan knew the family. A couple named Fisk, who took in travelers and asked only for help with whatever work needed doing in the morning. Lydia fixed a broken porch step before breakfast without being asked, and Mrs. Fisk watched her with the quiet, approving attention that ranch women give to other ranch women who understand what work is. Over dinner, Mrs. Fisk looked between Ethan and Lydia with the comfortable frankness of a woman who'd earned the right to her opinions. "You two married?" she asked. Lydia's hand went still on her fork. Ethan said, "No, ma'am." Mrs. Fisk looked at him. "You been alone since Clara passed?" "Yes, ma'am." "Long time to be alone," she said simply, and passed the bread, and that was the end of it. But Ethan felt Lydia's eyes on the side of his face for a moment after, and he kept his gaze on his plate. They reached Prescott on the afternoon of the second day. The Territorial Court Records Office was staffed by a thin clerk named Marsh, who had the practiced indifference of a man who has spent 30 years filing things he didn't entirely understand and had long since stopped being curious about any of it. Lydia stated her request: a certified copy of the document submitted in evidence in the Hart land appeal, Yavapai County, 1883. And Marsh disappeared into the back without comment. They waited. 20 minutes. Ethan watched the door. Lydia sat with her hands folded in her lap and her back straight, and her face showing nothing. And he understood that she had learned to wait like this somewhere, learned to hold herself that still in rooms where decisions were being made about her life, without her having any real power over the outcome. He hated that she'd had to learn it. Marsh came back. He set a document on the counter. Lydia leaned forward, and Ethan watched her face as she read it. Watched the thing he'd been hoping for happen. A sharp and sudden focusing behind her eyes. "The seal," she said quietly, controlled, tight. "Maricopa," Ethan said, reading beside her. "Yavapai County filing. Maricopa notary seal." She looked up at Marsh. "Is Mr. Aldridge's office on Gurley Street?" Marsh blinked. "Yes, ma'am. Third door past the assay office." She was already moving toward the door. Ethan followed. Franklin Aldridge was a man of about 60, with the kind of face that had spent decades outdoors before retiring indoors, weathered and keen-eyed and impatient with anything that wasted his time. He listened to Lydia without interrupting. He looked at the certified court copy of the document for a long time. Then he put it down on his desk and said,
I've seen this seal before. Lydia and Ethan both went very still. Not this exact document, Aldrich said, but this seal. This specific notary stamp. Look at the registration number beneath it. 1147. He opened a drawer, pulled out a folder, leafed through it with practiced hands. Put a paper in front of them. This is from a Maricopa County case from 1881. Different property, different county, different forged debt claim. Same stamp number. He tapped it. A notary seal number is unique and permanently assigned. This stamp, 1147, was issued to a notary in Phoenix who retired in 1879 and whose seal was reported stolen from his estate after his death. He looked up. Victor Hale has been using a dead man's stolen notary seal on forged documents for at least 4 years. The room was completely silent. Lydia's breath came out in one long, controlled exhale. "Can you testify to that?" Ethan said. "In territorial court?" "I've been waiting 2 years for someone to bring me enough to testify," Aldrich said bluntly. "I had the Maricopa case, but the family settled before it went to court. Hale offered them just enough money to walk away." He closed the folder. "If you can get me in front of a territorial judge in Dry Creek with this document, the Maricopa comparison, and any other properties he's currently moving against, I can build a case that disqualifies every forged document that seal appears on." He paused. "Every single one." Ethan looked at Lydia. She was looking at the document, and on her face was something he hadn't seen there before. Not relief, not yet, but the first real edge of something that might become it. Like the first crack of light under a door that's been shut for a very long time. "My father's land," she said quietly. "If the document that took it carries the same seal..." "Then the legal basis for the claim against your father's property was fraudulent," Aldrich said. "Which means the ruling can be challenged." He paused, and his voice was measured, not promising more than was real. "It won't be simple. It won't be fast. But it's possible." Lydia sat with that for a moment. Ethan watched her and didn't say anything, because this wasn't a moment for anything he could say. She straightened, lifted her chin. "When can you come to Dry Creek?" "Give me 2 days to prepare my documentation," Aldrich said. "I'll ride out after." "We need you there before Hale has time to move the process forward on the current claims," Ethan said. "He's already served papers. He'll apply for a court date within the week." "Then I'll come in one day," Aldrich said, without drama. "I'll leave tomorrow morning." He stood, shook Ethan's hand. Then he looked at Lydia, at this woman who had walked into his office with 3 years of loss sitting in her eyes, and the specific, hard-won precision of someone who had learned every detail of the thing that destroyed her. And he held out his hand to her, too. "Your father built something worth protecting," he said. "I'm sorry it took this long for someone to help you protect it." Lydia shook his hand. She didn't trust her voice enough to answer. They were back on the road within the hour. Ethan set the pace hard and steady, because they needed to be back in Dry Creek ahead of Aldrich, ahead of whatever Hale was doing with the time they'd been away, ahead of the next move on a board that was moving faster now. They rode mostly in silence, but it was a different silence, charged with something forward-moving, something that had a direction to it now. It was Lydia who spoke first, about an hour out of Prescott. "When we were in Aldrich's office," she said, "when he said my father's land could be challenged..." She stopped, reorganized. "I want you to know, I came to your ranch because I needed shelter for 3 nights. That was the truth." She paused. "But I stayed because I thought I might be able to help. Because when Tom Briggs said Victor Hale's name in your yard, it wasn't an accident for me.
Nothing about this has been entirely an accident. Ethan rode beside her for a moment.
"You think you came to my ranch for a reason," he said. "I think I ended up in the right place," she said carefully. "I'm not always sure reasons are things a person has ahead of time." She glanced at him sideways. "Sometimes you just keep moving until you're somewhere the ground holds." He thought about that. He thought about his empty house, and the smoke from the chimney, and the smell of warm bread that hit him in the chest like a fist wrapped in memory. He thought about her making a list of everything wrong with his ranch and handing it to him like a gift. "Lydia," he said. "Yes?" He kept his eyes on the road. "I'm glad you didn't leave after 3 days." The quiet stretched between them for a beat. "So am I," she said. They rode hard. Behind them, Franklin Aldridge was already pulling files from his drawer and building the case that could bring Victor Hale's entire operation down around him. And ahead of them in Dry Creek, Hale himself, patient, thorough, practiced at this, had no idea that the woman he'd driven off her land in Arizona had spent 3 months turning herself into the exact instrument of his undoing. He was about to find out. They rode into Dry Creek 2 hours before sunset, and knew immediately that something had moved while they were gone. It wasn't one thing. It was the accumulation of small things. The way the main street felt tighter than when they'd left. The way 2 men Ethan didn't recognize stood outside the hotel with a particular stillness of people whose job is to be seen standing there. Tom Briggs was waiting in the yard when they reached the ranch, sitting on the porch steps with his hat in his hands and his face doing the thing it had done when he rode over to warn Ethan about Jed Holloway. White around the edges, carrying something he didn't want to carry. Ethan was out of the saddle before the horse fully stopped. "What happened?" he said. Tom stood up. "Hale moved fast while you were gone. He filed for an emergency court hearing, day after tomorrow. County judge is coming out from Tucson." He paused. "That's not the worst of it." Ethan waited. "He served 3 more ranchers yesterday," Tom said. "Pete Reyes, Minnie Calhoun, and Frank Dodd over on the East Ridge." He glanced at Lydia, who had dismounted and was standing at Ethan's shoulder. "And this morning, one of his men rode out here. Told me to tell you that Mr. Hale requests the courtesy of a meeting. Tonight, if possible." A beat. The way he said it, it wasn't quite a request. Ethan felt the muscle along his jaw go tight. "What time?" 7 o'clock, at the hotel. Ethan turned to Lydia. She was already thinking through it. He could see it in her face, the rapid internal calculation she did when the stakes shifted. "He knows we went to Prescott," she said quietly. "His man followed us to the fork, but he'd have sent word back regardless. Hale would have assumed Prescott and drawn his own conclusions." "He's moving the court date up to get ahead of whatever we're bringing back," Ethan said. "Jed, Pete Reyes, Minnie Calhoun, Frank Dodd. We need to show them what we found in Prescott, and we need them to agree to stand together in that courtroom." "And I need to go meet Victor Hale at 7, Ethan said. She stopped, turned. "You're actually going?" "Yes," he said. "Why?" "Because the worst thing I can do to a man who works by keeping his opponents off balance," Ethan said, "is show up looking completely unworried." He went alone, left Lydia at the ranch making a list, her answer to everything he was beginning to understand. The way some people prayed and some people drank, Lydia Hart made lists, and rode into Dry Creek as the last light left the sky. Hale was waiting at the same corner table, same posture, same patient, reasonable face. But there was something slightly different tonight, a subtle tightness around his eyes, a quality of attention that was sharper than before. He'd spent 4 days waiting to find out what Ethan had gone to Prescott for, and that uncertainty didn't sit comfortably on a man who was accustomed to knowing everything ahead of time. Good.
Mr. Cole, he gestured to the chair. Thank you for coming. Your invitation was difficult to ignore, Ethan said, and sat. Hale studied him for a moment. Then he folded his hands on the table and decided to skip the pleasantries. You went to Prescott. People travel, Ethan said.
You visited the Territorial Court Records Office, Hale said. And Franklin Aldridge. He watched Ethan's face. Yes, I have people in Prescott as well. I have people in most places. He paused. I know what Aldridge does. I know what he would have said to you. And I want you to understand, before this goes any further, that whatever he told you about his evidence, it's not as solid as he believes it to be. Ethan said nothing. He had a theory 2 years ago, Hale continued. It didn't hold up then. It won't hold up now. And I want to offer you, genuinely offer you, as one practical man to another, a better path than what you're considering. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and produced a folded document, laid it on the table, didn't push it across yet. I am prepared to purchase your ranch at 140% of its assessed value. Cash, within the week. He paused. That is not a number I offer casually. Ethan looked at the document. He looked at Hale. Why my land? He said, specifically. Hale smiled. You know why. 2 water sources within a half-mile of your property line. When the railroad comes through this county, and it will come through, the access rights to those sources will be worth 10 times what I'm offering you today. He leaned forward slightly. I'm not trying to steal from you, Mr. Cole. I'm trying to give you a way out of a life that, from the outside, appears to be something you've already given up on. The table between them was very quiet. Ethan thought about what Lydia had said. He makes you feel like whatever's coming is reasonable. He thought about Daniel Hart, sitting at his own table, drinking coffee with this man, before signing away 11 years of his life with a handshake. You made the same offer to the Hart family, Ethan said, in Flagstaff. Something moved through Hale's expression. Very small, very fast. I've worked in many territories. Daniel Hart, Ethan said. Flagstaff, 1883. Water rights agreement with a Maricopa notary seal on a Yavapai County filing. He watched Hale's face with the focused attention Lydia had taught him. Not the hands, the face. You want to tell me that seal number 1147 appears on your Dry Creek documents by coincidence? The air in the room changed. Hale's expression didn't collapse. It didn't crack. But it did what solid things do when the structure underneath them shifts. It held itself more deliberately. The way a wall holds when the foundation moves. Consciously. Carefully. I think, Hale said, very quietly, that you should be careful about making accusations you can't support. I didn't make an accusation, Ethan said pleasantly. I asked a question. He stood, picked up his hat. Day after tomorrow, in the county court, Franklin Aldridge is going to answer it for everyone. He put his hat on. Good evening, Mr. Hale. He walked out. His hands were steady, and his heart was hammering, and he didn't let either of those things show in how he moved through the door and across the street to where his horse was tied. He rode home fast, because there was still a lot of night left, and a lot of work to do before morning. They were all in Ethan's kitchen by 9 o'clock. Jed Holloway, with the document Hale had served him laid flat on the table like a piece of evidence, which it was. Pete Reyes, a quiet man of about 40, who spoke carefully and said little but listened to everything. Minnie Calhoun, who was 62 years old and had run her ranch alone for 8 years since her husband died, and who sat with her arms crossed and her expression suggesting she had been waiting for an explanation and was prepared to be deeply unimpressed if it didn't satisfy her. Frank Dodd, whose property on the East Ridge was the largest of the group, and who came with the wariness of a man who'd been told to come to a meeting and wasn't sure who was running it. Tom Briggs stood by the wall with a cup of coffee. Lydia stood at the head of the table. Ethan noticed the shift in the room when she started talking. She didn't ask them to trust her. She put the certified court copy on the table, and she put Aldridge's comparison document beside it, and she walked them through the seal numbers with the clear, unhurried precision of someone who had rehearsed this in her head for months, because she'd always known this moment would come. The document used against my family carried notary seal number 1147, she said. This is a dead man's stolen seal. Franklin Aldridge has documented its use in Maricopa County. Tomorrow he rides in with that documentation. She looked at each of them. I need to know which of your documents you'll allow him to examine. Minnie Calhoun spoke first. All of them, she said, in the tone of a woman who has already decided. Every page that man sent to my property. Pete Reyes nodded. Same. Frank Dodd leaned forward and looked at the seal number on the copy. He had the deliberate quality of a man who read things carefully before he agreed to anything, which was the right instinct in any other circumstance, but which had also made him slower to act than the situation required. What happens if the seal's not on mine? He said. What if he used a different method for my property? Then Aldridge still establishes the fraudulent pattern on 3 out of 4 properties, Lydia said, which undermines the credibility of all the documents, including yours. She looked at him steadily. But I think you'll find the seal. He found a system that worked, and he used it. Men like Hale don't change what's working. Dodd sat back. All right, he said. Jed had been quiet through all of it, looking at the documents on the table with the particular expression of a man sitting beside the grave of a decision he hadn't yet made. He looked up. My father's name, he said. On that paper. His signature. His voice was rough at the edges. Even if we win this, even if the court throws it out, that forgery is in a legal record somewhere. My father's name, on a lie. He stopped. I want it on record that it's a forgery, not just that the claim is dismissed. I want it called what it is. The kitchen was very still. That's what Aldridge's testimony does, Lydia said, and her voice was gentle in a way it hadn't been in the professional explanation before. He doesn't just dispute the claim. He names the instrument. He calls the seal fraudulent, and he establishes the pattern. Your father's name gets cleared. That's the whole point. Jed nodded. He looked at the table. Good, he said quietly. That's good. Minnie Calhoun reached across and patted his hand once, briskly, and then took her hand back, because that was the ranchwoman's version of a long embrace. Aldridge, that changes the nature of the proceeding from a civil land dispute to potential criminal fraud against multiple landowners. He paused. I want the county marshal in that courtroom tomorrow. The county marshal, Ethan said carefully, recently received a very generous contribution to his office fund from an unspecified donor. Aldridge looked at him. You think he's in Hale's pocket? I think we don't know, Lydia said, which means we can't rely on him, and we can't exclude him. We have to proceed as if the proceeding is clean, and build a record strong enough that any corruption becomes harder to hide than to ignore. Aldridge studied her for a moment. You've thought about this a great deal. For 3 months, she said. Yes. He looked at Ethan. She always like this? Pretty much, Ethan said. It was late afternoon when Hale made his move. Ethan was in the barn when Tom Briggs came riding in hard for the second time in a week. And by now, that particular rhythm, Tom Briggs arriving fast, with his face wrong, had become a kind of signal that the situation had accelerated again. "Hale's men went to Jed's place," Tom said, barely stopping. "About an hour ago. 3 of them. They told Jed the court date's been moved to tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock. Said the judge changed his schedule. And they told him—" Tom's jaw tightened. "They told him the offer to purchase stands until midnight tonight. After midnight, Hale's withdrawing the offer and proceeding with full legal enforcement." Midnight. Ethan's mind moved quickly. A 6 o'clock court hearing meant the judge would rule before Aldridge even had his documentation presented, assuming Hale could manipulate the order of proceedings. And midnight meant Jed had less than 8 hours to decide whether to take the money and lose his land with something in his pocket, or stand in a courtroom at dawn with no certainty about the outcome. "Is Jed going to hold?" Tom asked. "He'll hold," Ethan said. He was already moving. "I'm just making sure he has everything he needs to build it with." He looked at Tom directly. "Are you in this? All the way in?" Tom Briggs was a man who had watched his county be carved up slowly for 2 years, with the uncomfortable passivity of someone who believes things will work themselves out. He stood there now, with the question on him like a weight, and Ethan watched him decide. "All the way," Tom said. Ethan nodded. "Then ride." He found Lydia in the garden. Of course he did. When things were moving fast and the pressure was high, she planted herself in the physical work of the place the way other people planted themselves in prayer. She heard him coming and looked up before he said anything. "He moved the hearing," she said. It wasn't a question. 6 o'clock tomorrow morning, he said. She straightened, pulled the sacking from her hands. "He's going to try to get rulings entered on the existing claims before Aldridge can introduce the fraud evidence. If the judge enters even a preliminary ruling on one of the properties before the criminal pattern is established, it complicates everything." "Can he do that? Get the judge to hear property claims before hearing evidence about fraud?" "He can try," she said, "if the judge is cooperative." She was already thinking 3 steps ahead. He could see it. "We need Aldridge to file a formal motion tonight, requesting that the fraud evidence be entered before any property rulings. It has to be in front of the judge before tomorrow morning, so there's a paper record of the request that can't be ignored." "Aldridge is at the hotel," Ethan said. "Then we go to the hotel," she said. "Hale's men are at the hotel." "Then we go to the hotel. Carefully," she said. He almost smiled. "You're not afraid of much, are you?" She looked at him, and for a moment the composed, forward-moving efficiency dropped slightly, and he saw what was underneath it. Not the absence of fear, but the choice to operate despite it. The same choice made so many times it had become a kind of fluency. "I'm afraid of plenty," she said quietly. "I'm afraid my father won't recover. I'm afraid that even if we win tomorrow, the territorial process for recovering his land is going to take longer than I want to think about." She paused. "I'm afraid that I've dragged you into a fight that could cost you everything you have left." She met his eyes. "I'm afraid of that one most of all." The evening air sat between them. "You didn't drag me," he said. "I walked in on my own 2 feet. "Ethan." "Lydia." His voice was quiet and firm, and left no room for the argument she was building. "My land is my land, and my fight is my fight. And I decided that the morning I rode into town and looked Victor Hale in the face. That had nothing to do with you." He paused. "And everything you've done since you walked in my door, the fence line, the garden, the telegram, those 3 pages of notes you wrote at my kitchen table at 10 o'clock at night. None of that is a burden. Do you understand me?" She looked at him for a long moment. The way she looked at him, Not with the measuring caution of the first days, not with the careful professional focus she brought to the work, but with something direct and unguarded, something she hadn't shown him before because she hadn't been able to afford to. Hit him somewhere behind the sternum with a force he wasn't prepared for. "I understand you," she said. "Good," he said. "Now let's go find Aldridge." They went out the back way, skirted the main street, and came around to the hotel's side entrance, which Ethan knew from the years he'd delivered grain to the kitchen. Aldridge answered his room door in his shirt sleeves, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and the look of a man who had been expecting exactly this kind of knock at exactly this kind of hour. Ethan explained the situation in 3 sentences. Aldridge had his jacket on before the 3rd sentence was finished. "I'll write the motion tonight. I'll need the county court clerk's name." "Harold Birch," Lydia said. "He's home by 8. If the motion is in his hands by 9, he has to log it before tomorrow's proceedings." Aldridge stared at her. "How do you know the court clerk's evening schedule?" "I asked the hotel cook when we came in," she said simply. Aldridge looked at Ethan. "Yeah," Ethan said. "All right," Aldridge said. "Give me 45 minutes. They waited in the hallway. Ethan leaned against the wall. Lydia sat on the small bench across from the door, with her hands in her lap and her eyes closed. Not sleeping, he knew by now, just thinking with her whole body still. After a moment, she said, without opening her eyes, "When this is over, whatever the outcome is, I want to go back to Flagstaff." He was quiet. "Not permanently," she said carefully. "Or, I don't know yet. But I need to see my father. I need to sit with him and tell him what happened here and tell him—" She stopped. "He needs to know someone fought back. Even if we don't get his land returned right away, he needs to know it wasn't the end of it." "We'll get his land back," Ethan said. She opened her eyes, looked at him. "You can't promise that." "No," he said, "but Aldridge can make it possible. And possible is more than you had 3 months ago." He paused. "More than you had 4 days ago." She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she closed her eyes again. "Yes," she said, "it is." Aldridge came out at 8:40 with 3 pages of careful legal language and a jaw set like a man walking into a fight he'd been waiting years to have. They went to Harold Birch's house. Birch answered the door in a house robe, read the motion twice, and, to his considerable credit, said nothing about the hour or the circumstances, and logged it into the court record with a timestamp of 8:57. It was done. Whatever Victor Hale's men had planned for 6 o'clock in the morning, they were going to walk into a courtroom where a formally logged motion demanding fraud evidence be heard first was already sitting on the record. Walking back through the dark street toward where the horses were tied, Lydia stopped. "Listen," she said. Ethan stopped. From the direction of the hotel, 2 voices, raised. One of them was the broad-shouldered man in the gray coat, Hale's watcher. The other voice, tighter and harder, was someone Ethan didn't recognize. He took Lydia's arm and moved them both back into the shadow of the building wall. The gray coat man and his companion were standing outside the hotel side door, speaking in low, urgent tones, and Ethan caught fragments. He filed something. Aldridge filed something. Hale needs to know, tonight. And then the companion was moving fast back inside, and the gray coat man was standing there, looking down the street with the expression of someone who has just watched a plan begin to come apart. Ethan and Lydia didn't move until he went back inside. "They know about the motion," Lydia breathed. "Yes," Ethan said. "What does Hale do when a plan starts to come apart?" He thought about those patient eyes, that steady, practiced composure. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. She straightened beside him. Her shoulder was almost touching his in the narrow space, and he was acutely, uncomfortably aware of that. "That's the one thing I don't know about him either," she said. "How he reacts when he doesn't get to control the outcome." She paused. "I think we're about to find out." The night was very still around them. Tomorrow at 6 o'clock, in the county courthouse of Dry Creek, Arizona, everything they had built over the last week would either hold or it wouldn't. The ranchers would stand together or fracture under the last-minute pressure Hale was certainly putting on them right now. Aldridge's evidence would be admitted or suppressed by a judge whose loyalties they weren't certain of. The pattern of 4 identical forged seals would be compelling enough to shift the weight of the proceeding, or it wouldn't be. Ethan knew the shape of that kind of uncertainty. He'd stood at the edge of it before, the night they told him his wife was gone, and he'd had 4 days of riding still between him and home. You either move toward the thing, or you don't. He looked at Lydia beside him in the dark. She was already looking at the courthouse. "Get some sleep," he said. "You first," she said. They both knew neither of them was going to manage it. 6 o'clock came in cold and gray. Ethan hadn't slept. He doubted Lydia had either, though she came out of the barn. She'd insisted on the barn again, same as the first night, some line she was holding for reasons he hadn't pressed. With her hair pinned and her face composed and Clara's boots on her feet, looking like a woman who had simply decided that whatever the day held, she would meet it standing upright. They didn't say much riding into town. The words had mostly been used up the night before. What was left between them was something quieter and more solid, the kind of thing that doesn't need language because it's already been established in the shared weight of a week that felt like a year. The others were already at the courthouse when they arrived. Jed Holloway with his wife, who had come without being asked, and stood beside him with her hand in his arm and her jaw set. Pete Reyes. Minnie Calhoun in her Sunday dress, which on her was less a sign of deference to occasion and more a declaration of intent. Frank Dodd, who had ridden in from the East Ridge before dawn. Tom Briggs, standing slightly apart with his arms crossed, watching the street. Aldridge was at the door with his document case, talking to Harold Birch, who had apparently arrived at the courthouse at 5:30 in the morning to ensure the motion was properly entered before proceedings opened. Ethan made a mental note to thank Birch properly when this was over. Hale arrived at 6:05. He came with his 2 men and his lawyer, a thin man from Tucson named Pratt, who carried a briefcase and moved through the room with the efficient confidence of someone accustomed to winning on procedural grounds. Hale himself looked, and this was the thing that put a cold thread through Ethan's chest, completely unrattled, composed, patient, like a man who had spent the night reconsidering his approach and had arrived at a new one. That was the dangerous version of Victor Hale, not the surprised version, the adaptive one. The judge was a heavyset man named Carey, who came out of his chamber at exactly 6:15 and looked at the packed room with the mild surprise of a man expecting a routine hearing and finding something considerably less routine. He read Aldridge's motion first. He read it for a long time. Pratt was on his feet immediately. "Your Honor, the motion is an attempt to introduce collateral material into a straightforward property claim proceeding." "Sit down, Mr. Pratt," Judge Carey said, without looking up from the motion. He finished reading, set it down, looked at Aldridge. "You're the examiner from Prescott?" "Franklin Aldridge, former federal land examiner. Yes, Your Honor." "And you're prepared to testify to the fraudulent nature of the notary instruments used in these claims?" "With documentation, Your Honor. Cross-referenced across 4 properties in this county and a prior case in Maricopa County." Pratt was back on his feet. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The claims before this court are—" "Mr. Pratt," the judge said, and this time there was something different in his voice, something that hadn't been there before. "I have read this motion. I have also, I will admit, been in contact this morning with the Federal Land Office in Prescott, who were good enough to confirm Mr. Aldridge's credentials
and his prior documentation of this particular notary instrument. A pause that landed in the room like a stone in still water. This proceeding will hear the fraud evidence first. You will have full opportunity to cross-examine. Sit down.
Pratt sat. Ethan felt Lydia beside him release a breath so controlled it was almost inaudible. He glanced at Hale, and there it was, the first real crack. Not in his composure, not entirely, but in the certainty behind his eyes. The patient confidence that had never yet encountered an obstacle it couldn't root around met something this morning it hadn't fully accounted for. It met Franklin Aldridge, with 3 years of files and a dead man's stolen seal, and a woman who had spent every day of the last 3 months. Aldridge testified for 40 minutes. He was precise and he was thorough, and he was the kind of witness that is most devastating, not because he is emotional, but because he is utterly, unshakably factual. He laid out the registration number. He produced the record of the original notary's death and the report of the stolen seal. He showed the Maricopa County comparison document. He walked the judge through each of the 4 Dry Creek claims. Seal number 1147, 4 times, 4 different properties, 4 different alleged debt instruments, each one dependent on a fraudulent notary certification to establish its legal standing. Pratt cross-examined aggressively and got nowhere, because there is nothing to do with a stolen seal number in a ledger except acknowledge it's there. When Aldridge stepped down, Judge Carey looked at Hale for the first time directly. "Mr. Hale," he said, "do you wish to address the court?" Hale stood. And Ethan watched something remarkable happen. Watched a man who had built an operation across multiple territories on the foundation of other people's passivity and fear stand in a small Arizona courtroom and realize, for perhaps the first time, that the foundation had given way. "Your Honor," Hale said, "I acted in good faith on the legal instruments provided to me by my legal counsel. If those instruments carried a fraudulent notary certification, I am as much a victim of that fraud as—" "Mr. Hale," the judge's voice was flat. "The same stamp number appears on documents in Maricopa County 2 years ago, in proceedings where your name also appears as the acquiring party. I am not inclined to accept a good faith argument this morning." He looked at the marshal, who was standing at the back of the room, with an expression that suggested he had been hoping this particular proceeding would not require him to make any decisions, and was now being required to make one. "Marshal Webb, you'll want to be in contact with the Territorial Prosecutor's Office before Mr. Hale leaves Dry Creek." The room went very still. Marshal Webb straightened, nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." Hale stood at his table for a moment that lasted about 4 seconds and felt considerably longer. Then he sat down, slowly, and the patience in his face had become something else entirely. The particular stillness of a man recalculating every option and finding fewer than he expected. Pratt was already leaning in, whispering. Hale didn't respond. Judge Carey looked at the room full of ranchers. "The property claims filed against Holloway, Reyes, Calhoun, and Dodd are dismissed on the basis of fraudulent legal instruments," he said. "The court will forward its findings to the territorial prosecutor and the Federal Land Office for further proceedings." He paused. "Are there any other matters before this court?" Lydia stood up. The room turned to look at her. Even the judge, who had not previously acknowledged her presence, looked at her with the focused attention of a man who has been watching the shape of events and has learned to notice who is at the center of them. "Your Honor," she said, and her voice was clear and steady and carried to every corner of the room. "My name is Lydia Hart. My father, Daniel Hart, lost his property in Flagstaff, Arizona, under a claim instrument that carries this same notary seal. The fraudulent document is on record with the Yavapai County Territorial Court.
I am requesting that the court's findings today be formally transmitted to the Flagstaff Territorial Office as supporting evidence in a challenge to that prior ruling. The room was completely quiet. Pratt started to rise. Hale put a hand on his arm and stopped him. Judge Carey looked at Lydia for a long moment. "Your request is noted and will be entered into the record," he said. "The transmittal will be made." A pause. "I am sorry for your family's loss, Miss Hart. The process of recovery will take time, but the record will reflect what happened." Lydia sat down. Ethan didn't look at her. Not because he didn't want to, but because if he looked at her right now, in front of all of these people, what was on his face would be more than he was prepared to make public. He looked at his hands instead. The room emptied slowly, the way rooms do after something significant. People moving in clusters, speaking in low voices, the particular release of tension that expresses itself in handshakes and exhaled breath, and the occasional short, disbelieving laugh. Jed Holloway found Ethan by the door. He shook his hand with both of his and didn't say anything for a moment, which was more than most words would have been. "Your father's name is cleared," Ethan said. Jed's throat worked. "Yes," he said. "It is." Minnie Calhoun walked past and squeezed Ethan's arm without breaking stride, which from her was equivalent to a standing ovation. Frank Dodd stopped and looked at him with the sheepish directness of a man acknowledging that he'd needed more convincing than the situation turned out to require. "I'll ride by your place next week," he said. "That south pasture fence you've got. I've got timber you could use." "I'll take it," Ethan said. Tom Briggs was last. He stopped beside Ethan and looked at Lydia across the room, where she was talking quietly with Aldridge. And then he looked at Ethan, and his face held the particular expression of a man who has several things he could say and has decided to say the most essential one. "She came out of nowhere," Tom said. "She did," Ethan said. "Good thing for all of us, she did." "Yes," Ethan said. "It is." Tom put his hat on and walked out. Hale left Dry Creek by midday. He left with his men and his lawyer, and under the informal escort of Marshal Webb, who had indeed been in contact with the territorial prosecutor, and whose previous discomfort about making decisions had apparently resolved itself sharply in the direction of enforcing the law. He left with the particular quality of a man who is not finished, not beaten in the permanent sense, because men with money and lawyers are rarely permanently beaten, but who has been stopped here, in this place, by people who refuse to stay beaten themselves. Ethan watched him ride out from the yard of the livery stable. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt something quieter and more durable. The same feeling he got at the end of a long cattle drive, when the herd was safely in and the work had held. Not glory. Completion. He turned and walked back to where Lydia was waiting with the horses. She had been watching Hale leave too. She turned when she heard Ethan's boots on the ground. "It's not over for my father's case," she said. She said it clearly, without bitterness, just as a fact she was holding carefully. "The territorial process, I know," he said. "It could be months, could be longer." "I know that too," he said. He took Birch's reins from her, and they walked the horses toward the road. "Aldridge said he'd handle the transmittal personally. He's going to Flagstaff himself." She looked at him. "When did he tell you that?" "This morning, while you were talking to Judge Carey." He paused. "He also said, and this is his professional opinion, not mine, that with the Dry Creek findings on record and 4 properties disqualified, the Flagstaff challenge has a strong foundation." His word. Strong. Lydia walked in silence for a moment. "Strong," she repeated, like she was testing the word, finding out if it held weight. "Strong," Ethan said. She nodded once.
And then she did something he hadn't seen her do before. Something small and private that she probably didn't know he noticed. She pressed her hand flat against her sternum for just a moment, like she was checking that her heart was still where she left it. He looked away and let her have the moment. They rode home slowly. There was no urgency now in the pace, no hard miles to cover before something else moved against them. The urgency of the last week had burned through and left something calmer, something that had room in it. "What will you do now?" Ethan asked. She rode beside him for a moment before answering. "I need to go to Flagstaff, to see my father, to tell him, in person." She paused. "And to file the challenge myself, with Aldridge's documentation. I want to be the one who files it." "When?" he said. "Soon," she said. "A week, maybe?" He rode in silence for a stretch. "You'd come back," he said. It came out somewhere between a question and a statement, and he let it sit there in that uncertain middle ground, without trying to resolve it. She looked at him sideways. "The garden won't be ready for another month," she said. "Someone needs to be here for that." He didn't smile. He felt something much larger than a smile, actually. Something he didn't have a word for yet, because it hadn't been in his vocabulary for 3 years, and he'd forgotten what it felt like to need it. "The garden," he said. "And the apple trees," she said, and her voice was quieter now, the composed precision that she used as armor, softening slightly at the edges. "You said you haven't walked up to the North Creek since Clara planted them. I'd like to see if they're still growing." A pause. "I'd like to see what they've become without anyone watching." Ethan looked ahead at the road. He thought about apple trees growing for 3 years without anyone walking out to them, pushing their roots deeper in the dry soil, holding out longer than you'd expect. Good land. Always. "I'll take you up there," he said, "when you get back." "All right," she said. The week passed the way weeks pass when they're full of ordinary things, which is to say fast, and with a texture that only becomes clear in retrospect. Lydia wrote 3 more letters, 2 to Aldridge, 1 to the Flagstaff family who had taken in her father, letting them know the shape of what had changed and what was coming. She spent 2 afternoons in the garden, and by the end of the week the winter squash was planted, and the soil she'd turned over had the particular deep color of ground that has been properly worked for the first time in years. She fixed the back window latch on her last day, the one she'd come in through on the night she arrived. She fixed it without mentioning it, and Ethan found it in the evening, testing it with his hand, the clean, solid click of something that finally held, and he stood there for a moment in the kitchen, holding the window closed. She came to say goodbye the morning she left. He was at the corral. She had her travel bag, and the horse Tom Briggs had loaned her for the trip, and she stood there in the yard with the particular quality she'd had the night she arrived. Composed, contained, carrying more than was visible on the outside. Except that it was different now. She'd been carrying loss when she arrived. What she was carrying now was harder to name, but it had direction to it. It was pointed towards something. "The squash needs water every 2 days," she said. "Not every day, every 2. "I know how to water squash," he said. "You haven't watered anything in 3 years," she pointed out. He couldn't argue with that. "Every 2 days," he said. She adjusted the bag on the saddle. Then she turned and looked at him directly, the full, unguarded version of the look he'd seen only once or twice, in Aldridge's office, and in the narrow space beside the courthouse in the dark. "Ethan," she said, "when I came here, I was out of road." A pause. "I want you to know that what you did, what you chose, it wasn't a small thing. For my father, for Jed, for all of them." Her voice was even, but just barely. "You didn't have to choose any of it." "I know," he he said. "I'm saying thank you," she said. "Directly, so there's no question." He looked at her for a long moment. "Come back," he said. "That's all I'm asking." She held his gaze. "I'll come back," she said. She rode out. He stood in the yard and watched until she was past the east fence line and the dust had settled and the morning had gone completely quiet around him. Then he went to the barn, got the watering bucket, and took it to the garden. She came back 6 weeks later. He knew it was her before he could see the rider clearly. Knew it by the horse's pace and the particular set of the figure in the saddle, that straight-backed, forward-leaning posture of someone riding with intention. He was at the fence line on the north side when she rode in. He walked back across the yard, and she dismounted and tied the horse and turned around. She looked different. Not lighter, exactly. Nothing that had happened was light. But something that had been compressed in her for months, some internal bracing against the next blow, had released. She stood in the yard without that defensive readiness, and what was left was something open and clear. "How is he?" Ethan said. "Alive," she said. "Better than I expected." She paused. "I sat with him and told him everything. He can't speak clearly yet, but he understood. I know he understood because he held my hand, and he didn't let go for about an hour." Her voice remained steady through this, but only by effort. "The challenge has been filed. Aldridge submitted his documentation. The territorial judge assigned to it is not the same judge who ruled against us the first time." A pause. "It will take time, but it's moving." "Good," Ethan said. "Yes," she said. "Good." She looked around the yard, at the fence line, the corral, the south side of the barn where the new shingles he'd put up last week were still bright against the older wood. She looked at the garden, and even from here you could see the squash growing, low and spreading, exactly the way she'd said they would. "You watered every 2 days," she said. "I said I would," he said. Something moved across her face, simple and complete. She reached into her travel bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper, held it out. He took it, opened it. It was a drawing, a rough pencil sketch, clearly done from memory, of an orchard. 4 trees in a row, roughly done but precise in the way that personal memory is always precise. Each tree with its own character, the spacing between them captured exactly. "I asked my father to draw them," she said. "He couldn't write, but he could still draw. That's what the apple trees looked like when my mother planted them." She paused. "I thought, if we're going to plant more along your North Creek, you'd want to know what a good orchard looks like when it starts." Ethan looked at the drawing for a long moment. He looked at the 4 trees, sketched by a sick man's hand from 30 years of memory. He looked at the space between them, the careful distance that good planting requires. "We'll go up there tomorrow," he said. "To the creek. See what Clara's trees need." "Tomorrow," she said. "Yes." He folded the drawing carefully and put it in his shirt pocket, against his chest. She went to see to her horse. He went back to the fence line, and the ranch moved around them with a particular ease of a place where the work is being done by the right people. Unhurried, steady, building toward something. That evening she cooked. She hadn't asked, she hadn't announced it. He came in from the barn, and the smell hit him exactly the way it had the first night. Warm bread, something thick and good on the stove. The particular quality of a lived-in house that has had too many cold and empty years. And Lydia was setting 2 plates on the table. Just like the first night. Except nothing about it felt like the first night. Nothing about it felt like a surprise, or a question, or a careful transaction between strangers. It felt like what it was. He sat down. She sat across from him. The lamp burned warm between them,
and the kitchen was quiet in the way that rooms are quiet when they're full of the right things. After a while, she said, without looking up from her plate, "The garden will be ready in 3 weeks."
"I know," he said. "We should think about the south pasture after that," she said, "for spring." "I've been thinking about it," he said. She looked up. "And?" "I think it can hold 30 head," he said, "with the right grass and a reliable water rotation." She looked at him for a moment, and the look on her face, direct, warm, unguarded, carrying the long, quiet history of a week of fence work and the morning of testimony and 6 weeks of waiting and a drawing of an orchard in his shirt pocket, was the most complete thing he had seen in longer than he could accurately remember. 30 is a good number, she said. It's a start, he said. They went back to eating. Outside, the garden grew in the dark. The apple trees on the North Creek held their roots in the dry soil and waited for the morning. The fences stood straight along the property line, and the lamp in the window of Ethan Cole's ranch burned the same way it had burned the night he rode home and found a stranger at his table. Warm, steady, visible from a long way out. Only now it burned for two. And Ethan Cole, who had spent 3 years keeping every light in the place dark on purpose, finally understood that the bravest thing a broken man can do is let someone show him where the warmth went, and choose with both eyes open to let it stay.